The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the David Pakman Show. A little bit later on the show today, we will be playing with an audience member the Does Lewis Know game. If you're interested in playing, please send us a message really now. If you're watching live on ustream.tv on Skype to David Pakman Show, say you're online, you want to play. We will get a lucky audience member who will have a chance to win a free David Pakman Show t-shirt or membership at their choice. And Lewis actually doesn't really like this game. You admitted it to me, Lewis, right? This game concerns you.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I guess Lewis doesn't want people to know, but I'm not making it up. It's not shtick by any means. Lewis said maybe there's a better game that we could be doing. I talked on the last show about Michele Bachmann and her statements that the Hurricane Irene, is a sign from God that spending is out of control. And people started emailing me saying things along the lines of, you're making fun of her religion, or you're talking about something that doesn't matter. You just want to make her look bad. And the reality, Lewis, is that I thought about this. It's actually really an important issue if we're talking about a presidential candidate, and they are saying that a hurricane is an act from God because God is angry, is sending a message about things like fiscal policy, for example. That's actually a big deal to me.
Right. If we are under the impression that someone running for president is completely insane and completely unqualified, then it's our job to voice that.
Okay, but that's what some people are upset about, saying that she's insane simply for being religious. And that's not what I'm saying. I will give you my explanation and tell you specifically why this matters. But just to refresh your memory, here's what Michele Bachmann had to say about Hurricane Irene.
And I don't know how much God has to do to get the attention of the politicians. We've had an earthquake, we've had a hurricane. He said, are you going to start listening to me here? Listen to the American people, because the American people are roaring right now.
Okay, and then there's the other clip where she also said, clearly this is that God is angry about, you got to get that spending under control, okay? The campaign afterwards came out, and some individuals said, well, it was just really kind of a joke. If that's true, it's really kind of a stupid joke. Why would you make a joke that makes you appear to be making decisions about hurricanes and fiscal policy based on your interpretation of whether God is angry and is sending weather signals?
Well, maybe it's brilliant because on one hand, it's going to convince the religious nuts that this is their candidate, and for the people who say that it's insane, she can say, oh, well, it was just a joke.
Yeah, well, if anybody would believe that, then it might be a brilliant thing. Here's the thing. Here's why this is a legitimate issue, okay? This is very, very specific. This isn't she has a literal interpretation of the Bible, and I'm not Christian, so therefore I think that she's crazy just as a result of that at face value. It's not that at all. If you have a president who believes in science and that there are weather patterns which come up, and hurricanes are something which are not somebody who is angry about fiscal policy sending a hurricane to you, but rather simply a weather pattern, is it not reasonable to assume they're going to prepare for that hurricane in a different way than a candidate who says a hurricane means God is angry, and God is angry about fiscal policy, and therefore, you know what? God's going to do what God's going to do. We don't even need to prepare. The last thing we need to do is mobilize resources to help people affected, because the reason we're even getting this hurricane is because God is angry about spending. It is a tangible difference. It is important. And Natan wants to comment here.
Yeah, I was just going to say that honestly, like the unscientific part about this isn't, what you're saying. It's the unscientific part is to actually believe in God and that God sends messages. I mean, you can be a scientific person and still think that the reason why the hurricane happened was because God was sending a message, and still believe the weathermen when they described the minutia of how it actually happened.
It's not a matter of not believing the weathermen. It's a fundamental difference. If you have two potential people preparing for a hurricane, and one of them believes the context for the hurricane is that God is angry about spending in Washington, it is very legitimate to question whether they would prepare differently or appropriately for that hurricane. It is a completely legitimate political issue.
Yeah, everything's a perfectly legitimate political issue when it comes to situations like this.
I want to know what the audience thinks. So the new poll up on davidpakman.com is when a presidential candidate like Michele Bachmann says a hurricane is a sign from God, maybe because God is angry about spending, does that warrant serious discussion by media and voters? You've heard from me that I think it is.
But
We also know that politicians say a lot of things on the campaign trail that we don't hear much of when they're in office.
Still, fine.
So maybe this is just some type of I don't know.
If this is the false statement that we're hearing from Michele Bachmann, this is the extent of it, that God is angry and sending a hurricane, that's bad. Yeah, Natan.
No, I was just going to say that the audience, the people who are sending you emails saying that you're, not being sensitive. I mean, what you're actually saying is that the crazy part is believing that God sends messages, right?
I'm saying that that the God is that we can. It's pompous and ridiculous, even if you believe that a literal God exists, to think that fiscal policy within the borders, the man-made borders of the United States, are the reason that God decides to send a hurricane. Even if you believe in God and believe that God controls the weather. I'll give you all of those things just for the sake of discussion. To think that the reasoning is because of fiscal policy among Democrats and Republicans in Washington is the reason is incredibly arrogant. That's what I think is crazy.
So you think it's not unscientific to believe in God if you separate God from, for example, fiscal issues or, the weather?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying for the sake of not dismissing that, I am conceding that part and saying even just suggesting...
Just pointing out the absurdity of it.
Right. That's my point. Okay, so log on to davidpakman.com and vote.